let's talk about a case that you've settled. It doesn't even have to be a false claims case, but like what recent cases that you can talk about? Because we can't talk about everything, right? We can't talk about active cases.
Right. One of the things
We
with the
can't
False
talk
Claims
about
Act is
field
the case
settlements.
deal, right? And so if you disclose it and talk about it, we tell people don't, even talk to your spouse, because if it ever gets out, the government can come to you and say, well, thanks for all the information, thanks for all the work, thanks for all the help, but you breached the seal and you get nothing.
I had this guy come to me, Bobby, and it was years ago, and I think he worked for Pfizer, and he was really high up, and he had this case, and he called me up, and he wanted to do an interview. It was under seal, and he wanted to do an interview at 60 Minutes. And I said, if you do an interview at 60 Minutes, you're going to violate the seal, and you're going to piss off the DOJ. Get them angry. I'm sorry, my language is, be careful. You're going to get the DOJ upset. And I said, you can have the money or you can have the fame, but you can't have both.
Right.
He does.
Token will get you on the subway.
Not only does he do the 60 Minutes interview, not only does he do the interview, he badmouths the Department of Justice, saying that they're not doing their job and they should be doing more. Well, of course, they just declined the case like the next day or something. And that was it. His case was over. And it was a shame because it was famous for a while back. It was in the press and all that. But, you've got to let the government do their job. And they do not like it when you get ahead of them in the press, right?
Exactly. I tell people, once we just settled the case yesterday, and part of the settlement involved, there's a settlement of the False Claims Act case. If the whistleblower was retaliated against, there's a way for you to bring a retaliation claim against the company as well. That they sometimes want to settle. And then there's a statutory provision that makes the defendants, not the whistleblower, pay the money the lawyers spend for experts. Some of these cases we spend $1 million, $2 million in hard costs and, $5 million in fees because they fight you every step of the way. And the defendants hire all the very big, expensive, New York, DC law firms. They put 75-page white papers together. They give that to the government and say, this is a white paper. It's an even review of this case. You need to look at it and respond. And of course, the government looks at it and says, here you go, Bob. Can you research this and respond to it? So we've got to respond. They file motions to dismiss your case, even if it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I was part of a Medco case, and I heard that they were paying the defendant companies were paying $3 million a month in legal fees.
In legal, right. And we've had one where it settled for $48 million back in 2019. But I understood that the defendants had paid about $15 million in legal fees. And then they were fighting us because I think our statutory fees were like $1 million for a case that.
Yeah, we should explain that to people. In the False Claims Act, under the False Claims Act, the lawyers, there's two buckets of money. One, the government has a claim, and they will settle it and then issue a reward to the whistleblower, which is usually between 15 and 25%.
Right.
And it's usually closer to 18 to 20 is where we settle them, or 20%.
Yeah, there's a lot of negotiation about that.
But then separately, the lawyers like Bob, or now actually myself, it's funny, I've only been a lawyer 5 years, so I'm getting used to it. The lawyers can get paid for their hours separately, so that doesn't come out of the whistleblower's pocket. All of that is paid by the defendants. Now, in addition, this is what I want to mention. In addition, many whistleblowers come to us. They got fired. They either got fired or the situation at the company was so untenable that they have to quit. And that's called a constructive termination, right? Meaning, even though you quit, it's still like being fired under the law because you were pushed out because you blew the whistle. And I have cases where people write an email and they say, hey, I want to fix this. This is terrible. Patients are getting hurt, right? I do a lot of healthcare cases. And literally the next day they get fired, and that's how big companies operate. So if you're a person who blows the whistle on your company, and then you get fired, or the company just makes you want to do things that are unconscionable to you, and you quit, we can file what we call an H claim. And Bobby, why do they call them H claims? Because it's subsection H, right? Of the law.
Right. So when they wrote the law, they said if you file it starts off and there's subsection A, if you file a false claim. And then
Right.
subsection B says if you use documents to submit a false claim, you can be sued for that. Subsection C says if you conspire to file a false claim, you can be sued for that. And there's these three provisions, D, E, and F, nobody ever really uses. They're all kind of small, bizarre things. And then subsection G says if you've robbed the government or committed fraud on the government and you've knowingly withheld funds, you need to return it. And if you
Yeah.
don't return it, that's a reverse false claim, they call it. That's subsection G.
Right.
And
But the H claim is the section that allows whistleblowers to get paid separately for the damages for being retaliated against and losing their jobs. And I'm going to explain something here because it's important. I had a case, and I have a lot of H claim settlements that I get involved in. And this is what they don't teach you in law school. And I got to tell you, most false claims lawyers don't even do this, Bob. I mean, I've had arguments. There was a lawyer, I love him, and, he was a clerk to a Supreme Court justice and the whole bit, smart group, smart law firm. I don't want to say who they were. But I wanted to file an H claim with the false claim. And they said, no, we don't do those. And, they had no clue. And I said, here's the key. If you have a big settlement, and this is what people don't understand, a big false claim settlement, and you have an H claim filed, which is an employment claim. If you take that same employment claim and you file it in state court, let's say you're in New York State, and you file that claim in state court, and you're a salesman for a drug company, and you make $110,000, $120,000 a year, your claim in state court isn't worth much. If they fired you and got rid of you, a regular employment claim, you're lucky if you get $100,000, if you get a year's pay. And that's considered a good settlement, right? $120,000, and you're going to pay legal fees, and you got to pay out of pocket for those fees. Under the False Claims Act, you have leverage over the settlement. So people don't understand this, and a lot of lawyers don't understand this, that if you have a $100 million false claim settlement, the company's looking at settling two claims. And a lot of the claims we do, Bobby, right? They're 200, 300 million, these big claims.
Yeah,
so let's say a $200 million settlement against some drug company or something. There's going to be a whistleblower share of that 200 million. Let's say it's 20%, right? So now you've got a $40 million share, about right, 10%, $40 million. Now the client's getting 40 million, and make it smaller. I'm sorry. Let's say it's a $10 million settlement, and the client's share is 2 million.
Right.
And after paying attorneys, let's say it's a 40% attorney fee.
So, usual, right. So that's 800,000. So you got $1.2 million for the client.
Right. The client gets $1.2 million, but the client wants more money than that. So say the client wants an extra $1 million. In order for the defendant, because the client has to sign off on the settlement, it's the United States plus the client against the bad guy, right? So the client has leverage over the settlement. So what we say is, okay, my client needs to make an extra $1 million. Now, if the company wants to pay my client $1 million, he has to pay $5 million more to the government. So 20% of that $1 million goes to my client. Or they can just pay directly to the H claim, and the government doesn't share in that.
Right. All of that, that's what we tell people. We said it gives you a different bucket. And with a lot of...
And it gives you leverage. Right. So we have taken clients who make $120,000 a year and gotten H claim settlements of $1 million, $2 million that they would never have gotten in state court.
Right. Because New Jersey...
leverage.
Right, has a SEPA law, the Conscientious Employee Protection Act, and those cases settle for much less, but the
The
false
key
claims
to
act,
an H claim is that the relator, the whistleblower, they call them a relator, has leverage over the settlement. So if you have this $100 million settlement and it wants to settle, if the relator doesn't sign off on it, the government has to go to the judge, and there's a whole thing in front of the judge.
a FAR hearing, they call it, a fair, adequate, and
Right.
reasonable. Is the settlement fair, adequate, and reasonable?
Right.
And
And
the government, right, has to get the relator to sign off on it usually after the False Claims Act settlement is done, and then they turn the case over to us and say, okay, if there's a retaliation claim, settle it. And when you look at the False Claims Act, the wording of the statute, it says that the client's entitled to 2 times their pay, and then we usually have to subtract money they've earned, from that, but they get 2 times the pay from when they were terminated to the current time.
yeah, but
And as
I've gotten settlements. I've gotten settlements for guys 20 times their pay. In other
well, that's
words,
right, but yeah, so the statute's
because
too.
any money that the defendant pays to the government, that 20% of that money goes to the whistleblower, but any money they pay directly to the whistleblower, that goes to the whistleblower
Right,
dollar for dollar.
all to them, and and a lot of the whistleblowers are, as I said, unfortunately, Joe, as we were saying before, people don't read books. And there was a little Italian fellow from, Florence, who wrote a book, Machiavelli, and he said, you keep your friends close and your whistleblowers closer.